wanted to share a couple quick things with you so we can get our speaker up here. We are finally starting to make some inroads, people. It's taking time, incremental. Our penny tax forum that we had got into the newspaper, and so it's also, as Vance was saying, it's sparked possibly 7 more forums regarding the penny sales tax, but we took the lead in that, so we should thank ourselves for that. Also, I thought you might find it interesting. I got this in the email today, and it was a study done by a Yale professor that discovered that Tea Party supporters are more scientifically literate than non-Tea Party. And he went on to say, in fact, Tea Party members tend to be more scientifically literate than other self-described conservatives, who have slightly negative scores overall. The findings should give both liberal and GOP establishment types pause over their caricatures of Tea Party constituents. And then he summed it up by saying, a mainstream media smear campaign of ordinary citizens has convinced much of the general public that members of the Tea Party are uneducated, backwards dupes of big moneyed interests who do not comprehend what is going on, whether on scientific matters like man-made global warming or on political matters like fiscal issues. Maybe they're just ahead of the curve. That's us, guys. We're ahead of the curve. Not to mention they were the #1 domestic terror threat, too. Yeah. And when Marie was talking about, Marie McCann, talking about Assyrian Christians and how they weren't letting them in, but they were bringing Muslims in, I just want to mention, we met with Congressman Webster a couple weeks ago. We had said something about, well, fortunately, Lake County hasn't had any of the Muslim refugees yet, and he says, well, I hate to tell you, but Lake County's getting their share now, too. So we're getting those as well. And I thought I would just, one more little quick thing. Well, besides our upcoming speakers. At our next meeting, we have Paula Hansberg. She's the president and founder of Legal Immigrants for America. Not illegal, but legal immigrants for America. Yeah, what a concept. After that, we're going to have Paul Sego. He's the director of nocasinos.org. And then after that, we're going to have Alex Sneaker from Liberty First Network. Now, be careful, the October meetings, because it's the first Wednesday and the third Thursday, those only fall a week apart in October, so be careful. It'll be just a week between the two meetings.
Wait. How's that?
The 7th of October is the first Wednesday, and the 15th is the third Thursday, because the way the calendar is, yeah. And then I wanted to just share with you real quick, as you know, I'm a real estate appraiser, and I was really thinking about how our profession is kind of a microcosm of what's going on all around us. For instance, politically correct stuff. We're not supposed to now call a master bedroom or a master bath the word master anymore because it connotates some kind of slavery issue. We're not allowed to call a house a handyman special anymore because it discriminates against those that are not handy. Most of our current coursework is green buildings, green residential, green commercial, green, solar. That's what most of our coursework is these days. After the Frank Dodd bill, we've gone from having 25,000 appraisers in this state to 5,000 appraisers in this state. Because it's just putting everybody out of business. Recently, I found out that our United States appraisal profession standards that we've been using for years and years are getting ready to be replaced with international valuation standards.
One world.
Yep, one world government, yep. But what really prompted me to even talk about it was the when we do appraisals for FHA, we've had a handbook for the last umpteen years that tells us the guidelines, and it's been about 100 pages. Yesterday, I got the newly revised version, and it went from 100 and something pages to 897 pages. of regulations for us to do FHA appraisals. I don't know about you, but I don't think I can memorize what's in 897 pages of regulations just for one type of appraisal. So anyhow, I just thought I'd share that a little bit with you. Let me get into our speaker tonight, Ben Wilcox, who drove all the way out from Tallahassee. He began his career in journalism and served for over 20 years as the news director of the Florida Public Radio Network and WFSU FM, the public radio station in Tallahassee. In 1999, Ben Wilcox was named the executive director of Common Cause Florida. He was responsible for representing the position of Common Cause before the Florida legislature on a variety of issues, including ethics reform, campaign finance reform, open government, and redistricting reform. In March of 2012, Wilcox became the research director for Integrity Florida, a nonpartisan research institute whose mission is to promote integrity in government, wow, imagine that,
Yeah.
and expose public corruption. He oversees the research arm of the Institute and is responsible for researching and writing reports on issues involving government ethics, money and politics, accountability, and transparency. And with that, I'll bring up Ben.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Great to see the North Lake Tea Party looking happy and healthy, and really glad I came down from Tallahassee. It's good to get out of Tallahassee, actually, because the legislature has been holding special session after special session there. They can't seem to get their work done, and I think it might be time for some of us to remind them who they're working for. I'm going to talk to you this evening about Integrity Florida and tell you our story, but I'd also like to hear about your group and how you came together and any corruption issues that you might be experiencing here in Lake County.
Yeah, our treasurer is corrupt.
Integrity Florida was founded in January 2012. We're a nonpartisan research institute and government watchdog. As Walter said, our mission is to promote integrity in government and expose public corruption. Our vision is government in Florida that is the most open, ethical, responsive, and accountable in the world. This coming session will be the 40th legislative session that I've been involved with in some way, shape, or form. When I first started as a radio reporter in 1976, Reuben Askew was governor, and that was the year he led the first petition drive in the state to pass the Sunshine Amendment, which required public officials to disclose their finances and created the Florida Commission on Ethics to oversee those disclosures. You all know that Governor Askew passed away last year, and I personally don't think we'll ever see a governor like him again. And that's not to be critical of Governor Scott, but Governor Askew had a passion and an integrity that is sadly lacking these days. He also didn't filter that passion like so many politicians do. He would get mad at his colleagues who disagreed with him. I saw him argue with reporters who asked him questions he thought were unfair. Governor Askew was uncompromising in doing what he thought was right, yet he was still effective in the art of compromise in dealing with the legislature. When Dan Krasner and I first started Integrity Florida in 2012, we met with Governor Askew. We talked for over 2 hours with him. It was amazing. He told us stories about what many refer to as the golden age of Florida politics, about his epic battles with legendary Senate President Dempsey Barron. He also gave us 2 great pieces of advice. First was when we were getting our picture taken with the governor, and he said, "Take your hands out of your pockets." Apparently, that's a politician trick. You don't get your picture taken with your hands in your pockets. The second piece of advice that he gave us related directly to his efforts to pass the Sunshine Amendment. And I brought with me, this is an original, one of the petitions for the Sunshine Amendment. A little small form here, but somebody gave it to me on one of my, when I was traveling around the state. It's kind of inspirational, actually. The first line of the petition reads, "Ethics in government. Public office is a public trust. The people shall have the right to secure and sustain that trust against abuse." That's pretty profound, I think. But anyway, the second piece of advice gave us related to the efforts to pass the Sunshine Amendment. And he told us, as we were trying to establish integrity in Florida, he said that when he was trying to gather signatures, petition signatures for the Sunshine Amendment, he went all over the state and met with the newspaper editorial board. He didn't have any money to do paid advertising, so he made his case for ethics reform to the editorial boards. His advice to us was to get the editorial boards on our side, and that's exactly what we did. The first thing we did, we put out a research report so we could have something to talk about. The report looked at the number of federal public corruption convictions in Florida from 2000 to 2010. Guess what? Florida had more than any other state. So that was our research finding, and it later became the headline in newspaper reports. Florida is #1 in public corruption. We may have slipped a little bit since 2010, but I know we're still close to the top. The report also made several public policy recommendations designed to reduce public corruption, like strengthening the Florida Commission on Ethics. We took Governor Askew's advice. That summer of 2012, we visited 26 newspaper editorial boards all over the state. And I do believe we did get them on our side. Soon we started seeing editorials talking about Florida's corruption problem and the need for comprehensive ethics reform, which it turned out had not been addressed by the legislature for 36 years, not since 1976, under then Governor Askew. Also that summer, we met with pretty much any group that would meet with us to talk about corruption and the need for reform. We met with the League of Women Voters, we met with the Tea Party Network, our good friend Catherine Baer. We met with Tea Party groups out in the Panhandle, all over the state. And, you know, the one thing that I can tell you is that while those groups, the League of Women Voters and the Tea Party, probably don't agree on very much, the one thing they do agree on is they want their government to be ethical and accountable, and they don't like public corruption. Actually, we found that when we brought Tea Party and League chapters together and let them talk, and they're surprised to find out that actually they do have, you know, more common ground on some issues than they thought they had. So that's what we do. We look for issues that people agree on, not issues that divide. We don't think it's about Republicans versus Democrats, left versus right, liberal versus conservative. What it's really about is insiders versus outsiders. And I've been an outsider all my life. And I would guess that many of you in the North Lake Tea Party consider yourselves outsiders, not insiders with the career politicians and the lobbyists. And when we say we want to take our government back, that's who you want to take it back from. It's career politicians and the lobbyists. Something else we learned in that summer in 2012, driving all over the state in my 97 GMC pickup truck, whether it's Miami-Dade or Lake County or Okaloosa, everywhere we went, we heard about local corruption. It's pervasive in Florida, and it's mainly at the local level. Corruption, cronyism, nepotism, conflicts of interest. I would argue that there is corruption at the state level as well, but for the most part, it's legal corruption. We had a House Speaker a few years back that used state funds to build a hurricane-proof air hangar for a friend who was a pilot. And this friend was also a big campaign contributor. Leon County State Attorney Willie Meggs charged this House Speaker with grand theft. But he got off, apparently, because that's just how things are done in Tallahassee. Nothing illegal about it. So back to the Integrity Florida story. After driving all over the state and talking about corruption and the need for reform in 2012, all of a sudden something remarkable happened. In November 2012, Don Gates became Senate President and Will Weatherford became Speaker of the House. Shortly afterward, President Gates announced ethics reform was his top priority for 2013. And Speaker Weatherford announced campaign finance reform was his top priority. To make a long story short, they delivered on those promises. Many of Integrity Florida's policy recommendations were in the ethics bill that passed that year, including strengthening the ability of the Commission on Ethics to collect fines that are owed and creating new avenues for ethics complaints to be filed. Prior to the beginning of the session, Integrity Florida was invited to present a research report on campaign financing to the House Ethics and Elections Committee. Many of those policy recommendations in that report were included in the campaign finance bill that passed that year, including more frequent disclosure of contributions and expenditures and the elimination of political committees known as CCEs, which were being used by lawmakers, using them to pay for personal expenses and meals. As you can imagine, Integrity Florida was proud of our impact in that first year of operation and of our effort to create a homegrown, Florida-based research group for good government. To date, we have released 15 research reports. We've done several reports on ethics reform, including one where we partnered with the Leroy Collins Institute at FSU and looked at what local governments in Florida have done to go above and beyond the state law on ethics. We've also done more reports on money and politics, including a look last year at how Florida's 4 largest energy companies use campaign contributions and lobbying expenditures to influence public policy and win favorable regulation of utility rates in the legislature and at the state's Public Service Commission. You can see all of our research reports on our website at integrityflorida.org. The legislature is continuing to use Integrity Florida as a resource for public policy ideas. Last year, it passed a follow-up ethics reform bill that again strengthened the Commission on Ethics. This year, former Senate President Don Gates continued his good work on ethics reform by filing Senate Bill 1372, which would have given the Commission new tools for collecting unpaid financial disclosure fines and applied lobby registration requirements to special districts. And it would also have prohibited members of the Enterprise Florida Board from lobbying that agency for 2 years after they leave the board. That bill failed to pass this year when the House adjourned 3 days early. If you followed the legislative session, the House just kind of folded up their cards and left town 3 days early. And that bill will likely be back next year. I want to share a recent victory over corruption that Dan Krasner and I worked on in the city of Tallahassee. We pulled together a left-right coalition that included the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, and the Tea Party. It was called Citizens for Ethics Reform. The coalition came about because the city had appointed a group of citizens to an ethics advisory task force. The task force met for 6 months and studied the city's ethical policies and then made recommendations for improving them. The key recommendation involved the creation of an independent ethics officer who would help provide ethics training for city officials and staff, and also have oversight over those officials and staff and be able to investigate any allegations of abuse. Well, the city voted to hire an ethics officer, but they did not give the position the independence that is critical if the ethics officer is going to be effective. Under the city's plan, the ethics officer was hired by and reported to the city attorney and auditor. Needless to say, a lot of people in Tallahassee saw the city's plan for what it was, an empty promise. Citizens for Ethics Reform was formed, and we collected over 20,000 petitions to put a charter amendment for city voters on last November's ballot. The amendment did several things. First, it created a volunteer ethics board consisting of 7 members. The ethics board was appointed by various entities in the committee. So one was appointed by the president of FSU, one was appointed by the president of FAMU, the state attorney picked one, the chief judge of the Second Circuit picked one, and then the city commission got to pick one. That was for a total of 5. And then those 5 selected 2 additional members to make the goal 7-member ethics board. The ethics board would be responsible for hiring and directing an ethics officer. The ethics officer answers only to the ethics board and the citizens of Tallahassee. So what did the city do when we collected the 20,000 petitions to get the charter amendment on the ballot? Took us to court, of course. They tried to get the court to keep us off the ballot. The judge ruled in our favor. I tell you this story because so often when you're fighting corruption, you feel helpless and you feel frustrated. It's tempting to become cynical and just declare them all crooks and give up on them. But I'm here to tell you, don't give up. There is nothing a group of concerned citizens like yourself cannot accomplish if you are determined to do it. And oh yeah, city voters in Tallahassee adopted our anti-corruption charter amendment by 67% of the vote. We now have an ethics board in place and an independent ethics officer. I'll close by just running through our legislative agenda for the coming year, 2016. Number one, let's continue the job of meaningful ethics reform. In 2013 and 14, Senate President Gates and House Speaker Weatherford prioritized passage of several of the anti-corruption recommendations outlined in the 19th statewide grand jury report. But lawmakers still need to pass the rest of those reforms recommendations. And that means giving the Florida Commission on Ethics the authority to initiate investigations, tougher penalties for ethics violations, strengthening the independence of the inspector generals in the state, and protecting whistleblowers, and a stronger ethics code. Number two, let's eliminate crony capitalism and corporate welfare. The state ethics code should cover all employees and vendors performing a government function or service, including so-called public-private partnerships, like Enterprise Florida, which is the state's economic development agency. It's a public-private partnership, but it was supposed to be funded 50-50, 50% public funding, 50% private funding. Over 90% of that supposedly public-private agency, over 90% of its budget comes from us, from taxpayers. We think there should be criminal penalties for conflicts of interest, misuse of public position, and self-dealing. All programs that function as systems of legalized corruption and cronyism should be overhauled or eliminated. State and local government policies should be free of favoritism and instead focused on creating vibrant communities where every employer matters and entrepreneurship thrives. Number three, let's offer fair access to public office. Most Floridians should have a chance to serve in the state legislature. The campaign finance system should be overhauled so that the pool of credible candidates includes more than just special interest group insiders. All candidates should have a fair opportunity to run for office, broadcast their message, enter debates, and offer voters more choices. We should restore the runoff election, eliminate single-member districts, and close the write-in loophole that prevents us from having open primaries. Number four, let's have open budgets. Government budgets at the state and local level should be statements of our priorities that are built with more public participation, access to data, so we can track results and make sure we're getting maximum benefits for all Floridians. A state budget tracking website that includes all records relating to planning, budgeting, contracts, and personnel should be launched as soon as possible. And finally, let's have open contracts. Let's end bid tampering, end bid rigging, bid splitting, and no bid contracts. Create a uniform competitive procurement policy and an outline platform for access to all records for every state and local government entity. Let's allow more citizen voices into the contracting process and never allow contracts to be approved without disclosure of the vendor name. Policymakers should enact these reforms now to end public corruption, protect jobs, and secure Florida's future. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it. And I'll be happy to answer any questions as I say. Yes, sir.
Ben, you mentioned open primaries. Are you familiar with the amendment that's proposed for 2016?
Top two.
Yes.
Can you explain that? I've just heard that it's coming. I don't know any of the details.
Yeah, I'm kind of surfacely familiar with it. It's an amendment that would open up primaries in Florida. Basically, it would mean that anybody could vote in the primary election. You wouldn't be voting just for Republican candidates and just for Democratic candidates. The open primary, what I was talking about, is we actually have an open primary amendment already in our Constitution. The voters put it in there in 1998. And it says that if there are only candidates of one party running for election, then all voters get to vote in that primary. Because the idea is that you're going to be electing somebody in that primary, they're not gonna face opposition in the general election, so, you know, everybody should get to, you know, vote on who's going to be their representative. But there's a loophole called the write-in loophole, which says if a write-in candidate files, no matter, and you know, write-in candidates don't even have to live in the district they're filing for. They, you know, you never see their name, you know, but they can file, and then if somebody writes in their name on the ballot, then their, you know, their vote is counted for that candidate. But so now what the parties are doing is that they recruit write-in candidates to, you know, kind of artificially close the primary. And we'd like to see that addressed, and I think that could be addressed. But then there's now this other constitutional amendment that they're gathering petitions for, which would just create a complete open primary system in Florida. Yes.
I was a corporate internal auditor for many years, and so I've been writing a blog for 8 years here on local government, and I found that there's a lot of things that I consider Florida to be in Barnum and Bailey stage of fiscal controls. You're aware of CCNA, which is the rule in procurement that when they want to build a government building, the rule says that they can't bid based upon price. They have to go out and find contractors for like a $50 million building or a $10 million building based upon engineering experience. And they have all these submissions and everything. And they completely do not discuss price. So then out of that, they get a list. They go through a process and say, yeah, these three are the most experienced. And the problem is, one, many times they're out of the county or out of the state, so no local contractors get any business. Secondly, they then, the way the rule works is that they have to negotiate for the top guy for the price. So he's already got it. They have to award it to him without any discussion of what the costs are. And then they have to negotiate with the guy who's already got it on what price he thinks maybe he should charge. And that just, as a guy who used to work in construction companies, oil companies, and everything, it just flabbergasted me that Florida has that rule. And one of our local representatives, Larry Metz, has tried to get that changed, and it doesn't get past all those construction firms and their lobbyists and their legislative supporters, and so every time you turn around, there's one of these new engineering studies on some project, and that's just one. I'll mention one other is the special districts and constitutional officers. There's absolutely no oversight. There's no public hearings on their budget, like our sheriff has over $60 million budget. No public hearings, no performance audits. He's not required to publish the details of his budget on his website. And to me, that is just absolute mind-boggling that the state would allow that lack of oversight. And so add that to your list.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, what I was talking about was at the kind of the state level, but at the local level, I think you've got even more problems.
It's a state law that does it.
Well,
I was just curious, as you've gone around the state of Florida, what seems to be the main areas of corruption you see in local county government?
there's a lot in kind of law enforcement that, you know, a lot of good old boy kind of, you know, especially in the small rural counties. If you go to a county like Miami-Dade, you see more institutionalized. You actually see, you know, bribes and that kind of corruption going on, but it's all over the state. It's amazing, you know. I mean, Okaloosa County, where former Senate President Don Gates is from, you know, he saw 4 county commissioners go to jail there. You know, Palm Beach County, you know, they adopted their own ethics commission, their own inspector general, and an improved ethics code after 4 of their county and city officials went to jail. So it's really,
Yeah, it sounds like that's a citizen-driven initiative for the most part. Is that only available in the charter counties?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, we did it in the city of Tallahassee with an amendment to the city's charter. I think most counties and cities have ways of amending their charters through, citizen initiative.
Well, at the county level, either you're a charter county or you're stuck with the state prescription.
Right.
And Lake County is under the state prescription. And, there's about 15 years ago, there was a serious inquiry as to whether or not we wanted to become a charter county. And the only real advantage would be the ability to recall elected officials. But the evil would be then, of course, you start getting a lot of populist issues that turn on emotion rather than logical analysis and good policy.
Yep. Well, that's the argument, against the citizen initiative even at the state level is that, we get pregnant pigs in our constitution and all sorts of other things. But, I would argue that it's still important to have that process. I think people need to have a way to work around their government when the government isn't responsive to them.
Do you get any voting fraud issues, corruption in that department?
We haven't gotten into election-related issues.
Do you know who would be looking at that?
There, I have to do a little research on that. I know there is a group in Tampa, and I've spoken with a gentleman who is working with them. And they're definitely looking at election fraud.
How would we find out about who that group is?
Well, maybe I'll get your contact information. Like I said, I'll do some research and try to
Okay, thank
give you a name.
Larry, I may know who that is.
Okay.
What can we do to best help the efforts of your organization? I know it's a small, poorly, inadequately funded, I'm sure, group. Where are you getting most of your financial support, and do you have a capital campaign or a campaign for ongoing financial support?
Yeah, and by the way, I very much appreciate you all passing the hat tonight for the gas meter. But we have donors, and we occasionally collaborate with other organizations like the Leroy Collins Institute at FSU, and they'll help us with the resources to do a research report. But you can sign up for our email list on our website, and if you go to the website, you'll see a list. We post all of our donors on our website. We feel it's important to be transparent about that, and so we just welcome your support in any way you can give it. I would hope that you would sign up on the website so you will get our reports as we release them. We just feel it's really important to get the word out on these.
Second question, sorry, I just thought of it. Is there any kind of a national organization of your type of watchdog groups throughout the country that you get together with periodically about what's going on in other states, for example?
Yeah, there's the Center for Public Integrity. There's an organization called Global Integrity, and even the organization that I worked for a while, Common Cause, has a concern about ethics reform, and so I kind of came to that issue, almost through them. But it's there's groups really in I would say all over the country, in every state, pretty much.
Well, this Judicial Watch is they watch out for this kind. I think they stick pretty much
To the courts.
Justice Department. They I belong to them, and they do a lot of negotiating.
Yeah, they're another watchdog group, and we need all the watchdogs that we can get.
When you talk about, making it so that more people can get into the political realm and run for office with, finance reform, what does that look like? What does that campaign finance reform look like?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question, and if you want to talk about campaign financing, that's my favorite subject. I'll stay here all night and talk to you about that.
Maybe not all night.
Yeah.
Well, I got something back.
Right. You know, the research report that Integrity Florida put out in 2013, we actually delivered it to the House Ethics and Elections Subcommittee, and we made a number of recommendations. And they're not the typical kind of legal women voters common cause kind of recommendations. The first thing in Florida, we have it's now a $1,000 limit on what you can give directly to a candidate. So back then in 2013, it was only $500 limit on what you can give directly to a candidate. But that very same candidate that can only take $500 from you directly can go over here and set up a committee called, Floridians for a Perfect World, and take unlimited contributions. And at the same time, another loophole around that limitation on direct contributions is you can give unlimited amounts to the political parties, and the political parties can turn around and give big money to the candidates. Parties can spend unlimited or make unlimited in-kind contributions to a candidate's campaign. So I was looking at Attorney General Pam Bondi's campaign contributions for this last cycle, and she got millions of dollars in kind contributions from the Republican Party. They basically ran her campaign. So to answer your question, Integrity Florida recommended doing away with the limits on contributions to directly to candidates, because having that limit there, it just forces the money into other more secretive kind of channels. And we think that if the candidates should be held accountable for who they take money from, how much money they take, and then be held accountable for how they spend it, instead of having these other groups do it for them. I don't know. We've got to rethink this whole campaign finance thing. It's just we're not getting the quality people. We're looking at the financial disclosure of our current legislature. The average wealth of the Senate is they're millionaires, all of them. The House is a little bit lower, but it's we're not getting the right people running for office. We've got to figure out a way where they can get the funding, get their message out, and they don't have to be owing their soul to these corporations and insiders that are basically controlling these elections.
Well, I know one thing, when you talk about campaign finance reform, we better be careful, because that John McCain and that Democrat, I don't care who it is, 10, 15 years ago, got this campaign finance reform, and it turned out to be a horrible thing. Yeah. And we just gotta be careful about who we're tying down.
Yep, and see, that's exactly what we're not doing in Integrity Florida, is we're not trying to, put limits on, because when you limit one source of funding, it just goes somewhere else. I mean, the money is out there, and it wants to get in, and it's going to get in. It's going to find, an avenue, a way to get in. And the courts have pretty much told us that, we can't. There's not much we can really do to regulate it. Our most recent report we put out was a Lori Collins Institute report on campaign financing. I mean, you can read that on our website. It makes a number of recommendations, but we kind of dedicated the report to the late Elston Rohde, who was an FSU political science professor, And he was one of the original authors of it's really the original campaign finance reform law. And it was the who gave it, who got it. And that's what Integrity Florida believes is we would like to see, along with recommending doing away with the contribution limits, and we also recommended doing away with the CCEs, but we recommended 24-hour reporting and disclosure. So we want to have these candidates, and in this day and age with the computers, that most campaigns are perfectly capable of doing that. When you get money in, you report who you've got the money from, and then you report your expenditures.
I have a little problem with what your last statement was about the 24-hour. When you have a candidate that's well-funded, has a big financial organization, you may be saying the truth. But when you are treasurer for a candidate who's a small-time candidate, those reporting requirements are onerous. Even the ones that are passed now, where you have to report every week or every 2 weeks towards it, are onerous for the candidates that are trying to get their foot in the door. So I think what that is actually putting in an obstacle for candidates to run, because they don't have the professional treasurers. They have their brother-in-law doing their treasury work. And it's, this past campaign year was just, I was a treasurer, I'm telling you, it was horrible. I wanted to kick whoever did that legislation, so I guess I know where it came from. So I understand what you're saying in principle, but when you start to put those types of requirements on campaign finance reporting, and do it on a weekly basis like that, one of them was 6 days, it just puts a big obstacle in the way of smaller candidates. And I think there should be something that keeps that from happening. Maybe it's candidates that are only have budgets over something. I don't know how you would do it, but you're keeping new candidates from running because of the requirements. They can't get a treasurer that'll do it because of the penalties for problems and that timeliness.
I take your point. Good to know. I mean, it sounds good to say we want 24-hour reporting and disclosure.
I would have killed you. I would have used 7 days.
The software sucks too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that
It's really bad.
if they're gonna do that, they've got to make it so it's easy to do.
And the other thing is, the people that can do that are paying large fees to these software companies to do that reporting.
Right.
And new candidates cannot pay those kind of fees. I know what they are. I did a candidate a couple of years ago that we paid those fees. We paid more into this software to do our financial than we were able to pay for campaign signs. Ridiculous.
Great.
Can I double dip?
Yes.
I've read articles in the past about the Supreme Court in Florida, and as it's rated as one of the most judicially active Supreme Courts in the country. And have you had any experience in your travels with ethics that points to our Supreme Court at all?
No. I had experience in my earlier role with Common Cause with what's known as the Fair Districts Amendments. I don't know how y'all feel about those. I supported them. And of course, the courts have now tossed out the maps that the legislature has drawn for Congress. The legislature came back and tried to draw new maps and couldn't agree. So now it looks like maybe the court will end up drawing the maps. And some members of the legislature are saying the court overstepped its bounds. In that, I guess I don't really have an opinion. I supported the Fair Districts Amendments, and I think I'm a no party affiliate, and I don't like when one party has the power to draw districts that favor them or in some way advantage them. I think the districts should belong to the people and be drawn to, fairly represent the people. Not a very good answer.
I just don't know how you do that, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, some people, they're making the argument now that there should be an independent, commission, but I take the point. I mean, it's hard to come up with an independent commission.
On that issue, couldn't you argue that the the Voting Rights Act actually is helped poison that problem? Because if you were to leave demographic information off of the vote count and just go purely on a population basis and say, so here are your raw census numbers that just say, live body at this place.
Right.
Okay, and just assign the districts based on at least on the federal offices, and do it like that without looking at their ethnicity or their voter registration. Then it's the pot what the pot is. But so you have a federal law though that to me works across the purposes. I too support fair districts. I think the concept to me makes sense. Why would you break up political subdivisions unnecessarily? I mean, you might do it because that's where the population count, and you need to start a new district. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Maybe next time we'll do it, start somewhere else. But that's how does that interact in your view?
Well, I agree with you. The worst, most gerrymandered congressional district in Florida is Corinne Brown's. Jacksonville district that,
We
goes
agree.
down and picks up pretty much every African American it can find in about 6 different counties. Yeah. And that was, district was drawn by the court back in 1992 as, based on the Voting Rights Act and what they felt they needed to create a majority, quote, a majority minority district. And that, if anything good comes out of this whole redistricting mess now is that maybe Corinne Brown's district will go away.
Best of luck to her on her campaign, though.
Yeah. She's been in office way too long.
Yep.
Another deal.
All right, well, thank
Was the report that you mentioned in 2013, is that available on your website?
Yes.
All right. No, thank you very much.
What's the website again,
Great
Ben?
work.
IntegrityFlorida.org.
If you go to our website, the link is there.
Next meeting, I want to make a motion to spend some of our money.
Make a contribution to Integrity Florida. Check is on the way, Ben.
That would be great. We'll have you on our website as well as funders.
Thank you.
Okay.